Okay, hello everyone, welcome to another video. I know I said I'd be posting regularly, but yeah. So, today is the start of a new series that we're hopefully going to be doing, mainly on pawn structures, specifically tied to some openings, but this one's going to be a bit of a basic one, a bit of a trial run. It could overrun, so feel free to skip through it or do whatever, come back to it later. I'll leave some timestamps in the comments for the different games, at least, so you can skip through to them if a game's getting boring. um, so yeah, let's just dive into it. So this is our standard pawn structure we're looking at today. Generally, we'll have 3v3 for white, and black will generally have 4v2. Obviously, it could be the other way around, but generally, this is what we're going to see. So, there are a few key ideas that we're going to be looking at. So, firstly, we're playing on the queen side this game. Generally, white is going to be trying to push their pawns and queen, and black will be trying to dismantle these pawns, or at least stop that. So, minor piece play is the key thing, really. So we can push these pieces forward. There'll obviously be ideas whacking your rooks behind here, try and take control of some key squares, but a really good example of the minor piece players, white will often want to swap off the light square bishops. Generally, g2, b7, that's where they'll be. Why is that? Well, there'll be plenty of light square weaknesses around this area if we do swap off the light square bishops, which will be great for white pushing their pawn advantage, especially when you get to squares like this. So yeah, generally, it'll be quite good for white to sort of execute that plan. Generally, I mean both sides actually, will do quite well to remove one knight pair here. I think black will probably do better to keep more pieces on the board, because their play is often more dynamic in these positions, whereas white is quite sort of simple, just pursue this this attack here. So we'll try and land our knight on one of these key squares. So once there is that light squared weakness, we can land a knight on, say d5, and we'll start taking control of some key squares around this area. Often we'll be threatening to push our pawns, especially in GM games that I'm going to be showing you, but we won't actually need to. They'll just be tying pieces up so we can play somewhere else. So obviously white's not the only player in the game, so black's plans will be the minority attack, by mainly pushing b5, b4, and similar with the a pawn. We'll see it loads in loads of different pawn structures, because there are a lot of majority versus minorities. So if you don't get it in this game or this lesson, we'll probably cover it again. Okay, so finally, rook play, obviously important. The d-file will obviously be quite open. You'll see it in quite a few games here, but it'll be quite open, so both sides will be trying to take control of that d-file and infiltrate on 7th rank or the 2nd rank. Okay, so we've covered some ideas, some things to think about while we're going to go over the next couple of games. So feel free to sit back, not pay attention, or focus if you really want to. Let's just have a go. Okay, so I'll skip through some of the openings and endings, but I just want to include them for completeness. I'm a bit of a nut for that. I quite like having the whole game there. Don't know if anyone else does. So these positions will often arise out of sort of Queen's Gambit and Slav type structures, sometimes a bit of a hedgehog structure, but that's generally what we're looking at here. Plane's going by, I don't know if you can hear that. Thanks, I'm not doing a third take. Okay, so we've got a semi-Slav here. Standard ideas really. We're just going to skip through this until we get our pawn structure. So we have a sort of Queen's Gambit decline structure here, but this is often a transposition, because if we remove some of these pawns here somehow, maybe by playing e4 and swapping off this pawn, we'll get our 3v2. So these are all fairly standard moves. I'm not an openings guy, so but here you can see they've played c5, so if we trade off these and they take that with the knight, we will get our structure. And they've taken that with the queen, and we now have our pawn structure here. Can't aim. 3v2. So, what do we want to do? Well, trade off the bishops is 1. That's the first thing we need to be thinking about. And maybe trying to move our knight to a good square and also use our bishop. It won't be as useful here because the bishop's aiming over this side. Maybe it can keep black's bishop penned in. And yeah, we've already got control of the d file. So bishop d4, let's hit the queen away. Queen e7, quite standard. And now we're planning on getting bishop f3. We've got our knight to one of the 3 key squares that we mentioned before. Our knight's looking over here, trying to take control of some squares for our infiltration with our pawns. So, rook fd8, trying to match up our rook on the d file. Bishop f3, here we go, swapping them off. Knight g4, well, they are sort of avoiding the bishop exchange first and maybe trying to put pressure on this knight here with some tactics, but it doesn't really work when we play bishop here. They haven't got time to take here yet. So, I mean, you can see it here, if you took back here, then bishop takes here, and it's messy, but we'll live, I think. So, we take the bishop, queen takes, and now you can see all these squares around here are quite weak. And we will drop our knight back, because we want to keep our knight to jump back onto one of those key squares later, and potentially trade this bishop off, so we can keep our knight in the game. Bishop takes, knight takes, and queen c7, going after that cheeky h2 mate, and knight f3. So here's the first sort of issue with black's strategy here. This is all fine currently. White's sort of got a couple of their goals going. We swapped off a light square bishop, and now we're sort of ready for like phase 2 of the plan. How are we going to pursue pushing these pawns? So this is marked as an error in the book that I got it from. I can show you the books that I got it from actually. All these games have come from a Sokolov book, and this book that I got the other day, which I've only just started reading through, it's pretty good. So yeah, all the games that come from there. Hopefully I'll be looking into more of my own games in future. But, so this is not a blunder specifically, but it allows us to keep this knight. So, why is that problem? Well, generally in these positions, with our majority on the queen side, let's get rid of that arrow. It's generally it's quicker for us to push that majority than it is for black to push their majority. Just because they've got more pawns to move, that's pretty much it. So if we have the knight, generally it gives us more chances to be active. So we want to keep this knight if possible. So let's show how we could have swapped that off. So if black goes instead for knight e5, we play queen e4. We don't want to wreck our pawn structure. Oh, done that again. Don't want to wreck our pawn structure. Queen takes. Now a rook takes. Now the rook takes d1. Rook takes, and now we're going to swap off rooks. And with queen versus queen, this is very difficult for white to pursue the plan of trying to push these pawns and convert. I mean, it's still not, the game's still not over, but it's very, very drawn, and it's very difficult to create this pass pawn that we need to in the endgame. So, that is why this is a strategical error. We want to be able to, black wants to get rid of this knight and just have an easy draw, whereas white wants to fight for the advantage because they can claim that they've got one because they've got this easier to push pawn structure on the queen side. So rook takes, the only natural move. Still going for this d-file control, by the way. Rook takes, and now we can see we've got our structure and we have queen and knight versus queen and knight. So generally what Sokolov says in his book is the side with the majority on the queen side and queen and knight in these type of positions has a slight edge, but it's also easier to play, which is important over the board. Forget engines, it's easier to play this. So we'll play h3, kick away the knight to a worse square, knight f6, and now our plan is we're going to try and convert this into a pass pawn. So what we do, we need to get our king over there, get an extra piece into the game. King f1, queen d6. Sort of just centralising the queen a little bit more. Black probably does want to do similar, although because they don't want their queen to be sort of guarding these pawns, it's not a great idea to have your queen defending against pawn breaks. She's much more useful elsewhere. Okay, king e2, continuing with the plan. e5, generally a key break for black in these positions. Trying to create some dynamism in the play, but this is usually more effective when there are more pieces on the board. It's not as effective here. Queen d2, swapping off will probably give us the edge. Our king is closer to our pawns than black's, so swapping these off will allow us to continue our plan, potentially win this. And since the onus will be on black to stop this, let's just show this. So this pawn's now weak, so let's just say we play knight here to defend it, because we also want our knight to come over to this square as well. We've got plenty of options. We can now try and move our king in and remove this knight, and black will also have to try and defend this pawn as well. So e5 can become a weakness, and our king's just too close to these pawns for them to go for this trade. So queen c5. So black doesn't want to help white with this. But according to Sokolov, queen c6 is black's last chance. Generally because queen c7 keeps him on dark squares and is giving up this pawn here. Generally trying to go for this pawn, but it's going to create some dynamism. And if these pawns are broken up, let's get rid of some of these arrows. If these pawns are broken up, it'll be easier for black to push their majority, right? So he suggests this line where knight e7, knight takes, and then the knights are off, and this is drawn. White has dropped a pawn, but they'll probably keep it back. They'll probably get it back, or just go for perpetual. Okay, so let's go back to the game. So queen c5. They did not play the suggestion of queen c6, just going for a bit of craziness. It's generally what I like to do in endgames as well, where I'm slightly worse. Just try and play active is a good suggestion. So queen g5. Queen c6 also prevented this double threat of going after the knight and the... let's get rid of that arrows. Also protected against the double threat of going after the knight and the pawn. Knight d7, the only way to defend both. And now black is in trouble, because their knight is quite loose. These pawns around the king are in trouble, and because the queen has decided to try and stop the majority attack, she's too far away to help. So knight moves back. Queen f6, and we're just going to repeat a couple of times, and now our knight is going to come in over here. And I wanted to go over there, maybe to this square, but we're now going to put pressure on the f pawn, because the queen is strayed too far away, trying to stop our attack. King g7, the final error in this game. So, I mean, it's obviously something you might want to play. Your knight's pinned, your king wants to try and get out, try and wriggle out, but how can we punish it? Knight e4. Hit this misplaced queen, and also go for this square here. And note, the queen cannot protect the square on c6, because if she goes there, we'll play knight d6 and attack everything. Everything's just weak. And yeah, we'll just win with a very cheeky mate over there. Okay, so queen a3. What else do you do? Just try and go after these pawns with check. Try and make a bit of a mess. Maybe hopefully get a perpetual. Queen f6, king g8, and unfortunately black resigned here because there's no way to defend this threat and save the queen, and you don't have a perpetual here. Even if you take one of these pawns, or check here, the king will escape, and black know that, so he resigned. So yeah, that's just an example of how we drew away black's pieces to stop our majority attack, and they ended up losing on the king side. So it's not all about pushing these pawns. It's sometimes about drawing them away and then creating threats elsewhere. Okay, so let's move on to game 2. So we've got another d4 opening. These positions often arise out of d4 openings. Bishop a6 I despise as a move. I don't know why, I just don't like it. But it's a sort of a hedgehog type move, so this does sort of cause problems for white in the next game, because they don't know how to respond to it. Bishop e7, c6, so yeah, and now they've pushed d5, and we'll probably get our pawn structure soon. It looks quite an unassuming opening. I struggle to play positions like this. But rook e1, we're getting out of the pin, which is the main reason of bishop a6. You try and take an advantage of this pin so you can potentially take here. Bishop b7, keeping an eye on the pawns. E4, a good pawn break to do in these kind of structures. D takes, knight takes, c5, and you can see we're going to get our pawn structure very, very soon. Pawn takes, knight takes. Notice we taken with the knight, because once again we are going for the exchange. King takes, queen c7, trying to put pressure on these pawns. Knight 2 to f3, so what are we trying to do? I think this is a good place to stop and look at the position a little bit. So what have we got here? Well, it's dynamically balanced. So white's obviously got the clear plan of playing the queen side, whereas black's not worse. They've got the idea of pushing e5 and trying to create counterplay sort of generally towards the king side. However, every pawn push does make a weakness, so once black does go for this plan of e5, we'll have d5 and f5 weaknesses, and yeah, white will just continue trying to play on the queen side. Queen b7, pinning the knight. Pretty standard idea. They want to try and get e5 in, so why would you allow a knight to try and help this square out? b4, Kasparov is going for the queenside push immediately. And you'll see he'll try and get more squares to protect this c5 square to try and create our pass pawn. Rook fc8, not recommended. Obviously it's a good idea to try and go after these pawns. However, since black is trying to commit to this pushing of e5, it's probably best to play rook fe8 and play faster, because going for this is a bit too slow. So, rook ac1, we're matching up the rooks, and we're trying to keep control of c5 to try and get a pass pawn. Bishop f8. We will see that this bishop becomes an issue. Currently, it is protecting against any future ideas of maybe trying to get queen e5 in with some tactics of trying to mate. But, and maybe it's also protecting against potential other bishop moves and, well, threats to swap off the bishop, and then maybe moving the rook back to push e5. King g1. We're tired of this pin now. We want to use this knight. We want to take control of e5. We want to maybe even antagonize it so we can get control of the squares around the pawn. Rook c7. That is a bit of an odd move. They're trying to double up here and put pressure on our c-pawn. However, rook e8, admitting that you made a mistake is probably best here. Still going here. Yeah, with bishop f8 and rook c7 in the real game, you've still not got a lot of space here, and you'll be cramped probably for the rest of the game, which is not something. I mean, everyone knows I'm a very active player. I don't like this kind of stuff. I prefer if we can play actively. So e5 is still the right choice here. a3, we're just strengthening our pawns a bit don't want to allow this bishop some cheeky opportunities to swap off. Rook e8. Black's finally admitted their mistake. It's taken them a bit too long, and they were getting ready to push the e-pawn. Bishop b2. So yeah, we still want to continue with our queenside plan, but it's not clear how we're going to do that yet. So I think Kasparov made the right choice now. Surprisingly enough, a world champion made the right choice. So we need to try and use our better piece coordination here, and we're thinking about playing move by move, which is sort of how can we continue to improve our position just very slowly. Each move we'll try and make sort of a positive choice for our position rather than going for a tactic in 10 moves time or something like that. So we're basically looking, these knights need some better squares, and we're trying to find a way to push here. But for now, some manoeuvring is in order. So our bishop's out of the way, so our rook can support this. Yeah, and everything's all protected now as well. So e5. Finally, black's got it, but at what cost, right? The pawn was currently protecting these two highlighted squares, and Kasparov not immediately, but pretty much just now pounces on this. These are now key areas for assault. Knight f5. And now the real plan is to continue trying to push this pawn and smash open the kingside. Create some dynamism. Very Ivan Sokolov type play this. But the problem is that we can move our knights around now and potentially get... Oh, sorry, that was a bit of a poor error. We can potentially get to d5 and have good clamping down on the queen side here with our minor pieces. So, knight e5. Yeah, so the weaknesses are only on the black side. The good thing about playing hedgehog and cramped positions is if you play them well, they can often open up very quickly and leave the person who has overextended himself in quite a poor position. So white has weaknesses on f3 and d3, and with the knight we can jump in. So rook e to d1. So what we're doing is we're just trying to keep more control of the d-file, as we did mention before. D-file control is often very important in these positions, and our rooks together are quite good there. h6. So black is still trying to get more active. You can't really play this because you'd lose a pawn immediately. Well, actually no, you wouldn't lose a pawn. Maybe it was a way to go because the queen will be under attack, but then this knight is in trouble, and maybe your queen h5, then you will be have major issues. My god, I've put arrows everywhere. I've gone full Hikaru. Never go full Hikaru. Let's get rid of some of these. Okay, so yeah, this bishop is... Where is it going to go? Because this square, this square, this square, this square are all taken. Cannot move here. h6 is creating some breathing room for the king, potentially, but I'm not too sure. So the key thing is here, how do we punish black's poor coordination? Because, I mean, look at these rooks. They're not coordinated very well. This rook's protected by a knight. Yeah, so how can we punish this? Boom! Bishop takes e5, and it's not a tactical blow, but it is a very good move. So what we've done is, we've thought, what is black's most active piece? Because if we go back to this position, what is black's most active piece? Well, it's the knight that is threatening to jump into one of these two squares. Simple as. So we remove that issue. Get rid of it. Gone. Knight takes e5. So now what happens when we remove it? Black loses control of these two squares here. They've basically lost their chance to infiltrate there, because it's going to take a lot of moves for this knight to try and make it to one of these two squares. So now we can focus on blockading the e-pawn with our knight, stop black getting any further counterplay, and then we'll move the other knight, maybe via g2 to d4. So rook takes, knight e3, blockade the pawn, rook e6. Not too sure what that move does, if I'm being honest with you. Maybe they were just worried about potential knight moves, maybe going here, and then you could have issues there, or the rook was technically undefended as well, so maybe you could have some discoveries. Maybe queen here could be an issue. So what do we do now? What's white's least active piece? Knight hg2. So we want to get to d4 now and get our queenside pawns moving, or at least remove one of these black pawns. Knight e7, knight f4 with tempo on this rook. And you see the lack of coordination between these rooks has been an issue all game. Rook e8, and our knight has moved to a great square with support, so even if it's taken off we can just replace it with another knight. Rook c6, black continues to lose coordination here. Our knights are fantastic, and we swapped off black's best pieces here, and pushing c5 is basically just a matter of time at this point. So to try and get back into this game, knight e5 is the move, because they're going to replace that knight and try and get back into one of these squares. So how can we stop this? Queen g4. Why is that a good move? Because knight e5, and we can actually just take this pawn, because the coordination of these pieces is just so terrible. We can take it, and there are no discoveries that work. So queen g4, great move. Stopping black's counterplay, prophylactic play here. Rook c e6. Trying to prove, yeah, I will have a good discovery. h4 gives the queen some breathing room, gives the king some breathing room, and also tries to cramp these positions. So like maybe playing g5 at some point for black would be good, so we can just stop that with h4, and the bishop will struggle to remain in the game. Well, it's not in the game now, but it's struggling. So yeah, I did write that there. Patience is key in these positions. You've got a better position. You now have to figure out how to place your pieces in the right way to start pushing for it. King g2. This is a very sort of classic Kasparov move. When he's like sort of the height of the complexity of the game, he just moves his king. Like, it's getting out of future checks for when the knight does try and land on f3. And also, if the queen decides to try and pin again, it's not happening with this pawn being here. So yeah. Oh. Okay. Queen e5. It's a very nice battery, but you're just looking at a pawn here. So the queen is probably moving here to try and swap off or find a way into the game. But you can see with this h4 move, swapping off is not happening. And yeah, I mean, the queen hasn't got many squares. Queen f5. Yeah, the queen trade will probably not make black's position easier to play. And here is the sort of material loss that results when you're playing in cramped positions like this and under a lot of pressure. So let's see what we could have played before this, before I analyse that. So what happens if queen takes? Obvious suggestion. Knight takes, and now both of our knights are basically in charge of the game. The b pawn is weak. Our knight's coming in, can do whatever it wants. This pawn's blockaded still, and if we move the knight over here, we're threatening to win some material, and we're also threatening this knight over here. This knight, you'll see later in the actual game, is also an issue. Rook c6, trying to stop all of that. Knight d7, oh sorry, knight d to e7. Threatening this knight and also giving a nice cheeky check. Bishop takes, rook takes, and now we're just dominating here. The rook's got into the 7th, as we suggested in the opening. Rook wants to get into the 7th. We'll be pushing these pawns in a matter of time. And yeah, bishop f8, getting out of the way because it was under pressure. And it's still a terrible piece. Knight e3, we're now going to swap our knight to a better square. And yeah, this was apparently black's best try, but still, we just need to figure out how to move our pawns and then we're away. So we're still better here. Our rook is in a fantastic position. Our knight is now protecting this, that frees up the other rook to infiltrate. It's all white here. So why does g6 lose? Well, queen takes, rook takes, and then knight c7, and we're going after the rook, and we're going after the a pawn. Simple as, really. Knight forks. Rook d8. The only way to save the rook and this knight here, which was hanging, like I said before. So rook c2, how can we make use of this pin? Well, we're going to pin and win, aren't we? a5. The minority attack here is too slow, because now we just pin and win, go after this knight. A takes b, and rook e7. The bishop hasn't got time to take here because they lose a piece. And knight c5. So Ivanchuk resigned here because he can't avoid significant material loss. I'll just play through the next few moves showing the idea of why they can't. Rook e6, trying to avoid this and protect that. Knight f4, hitting that rook yet again. Rook e7, just shuffling back. The other knight comes to d5, and these knights are slowly removing the amount of squares that this rook can go to. Rook e to e8, and knight takes here, winning the final pawn on the queen side, allowing these pawns to roll, and the knight can't take because you'll lose the exchange. So that's a very, very clean win by Kasparov. I noticed we're half an hour in, and I've got 2 more games to go. So this is quite a long video for me. Feel free to come back to it later, but I will continue. It's getting dark in here. I need some better lighting. But yeah, we will continue on, so feel free to stop here if you want. Have a break, weary traveller. Okay, let's continue looking at some more games. So these are more going to be black wins. First one is going to be what happens if white doesn't execute mainly the plan properly, and what happens if the minority attack actually succeeds. So we start again, c4. It's not just Queen's Gambit positions that can get into this kind of stuff. This is pretty standard English opening territory. a6, and then we have got d4. d4 is often the right push. And we'll end up with our pawn structure right now. We've got our 3 versus 2. d6 by black, b3, knight bd7, e4, bishop e7. These are all pretty standard moves. Bishop b2 is a standard move in this position, but it's sort of more of a hedgehog type position. So we're going bishop a3 here, trying to put some pressure on this pawn. We're still trying to aim for these standard sort of positions we've been looking at in the last 2 games. Queen b8, protecting the pawn. Rook ad1, and eventually they're going to have to push this pawn or make a knight move or something like that, because we're putting pressure on this, and we'll get a kind of position we like. When black tries to play hedgehog positions, they try and don't commit to anything. They want white to be the one who commits, so then they can sort of play off that. It's more of like a counter-attacking game. Knight c5, rook fe1, and black finding castles. So let's have a quick look at the position before we pounce on anything. So white has more space, and generally in those kind of positions you don't want to trade off, because it makes your space look more empty. So if we say remove this pair of knights, black gets less cramped, and white has more squares to defend with fewer pieces. So generally, don't want to trade off pieces if you've got the majority. So white wants to try and force a pawn structure change to make some progress. Generally what black doesn't like, unless it's sort of the position they want to get out of it. So we want to force black to commit to a structure so then we can plan after that. So forcing them to decide might psychologically be in our favour, but you never know. So e5. So trying to commit to a pawn structure change, d takes, queen takes. Even going for a queen trade, it's probably about right to avoid this trade, because say we do accept that. We've got our majority, our rook is on the d file, we've got control of it, and we'll get ready to swap off the light square bishops, which is exactly sort of the kind of thing we want to do. If we've specifically played bishop a3, black should know we're going for this structure here. So they're all the main plans. We've got our rook on the d file, got a knight on an active square, trading off the light square bishop. So black avoids this trade, playing into white's hands, no go. Bishop b2. Yeah, I called this Old Faithful because everyone does this, don't they? Lining up an attack on G7 and fingers crossing for the future type thing. um, Going for the light square bishops was probably an option here, maybe with like Queen E3, Rook E8, and then Knight E5. Trying to swap off the bishops. C6, or Bishop C6, sorry. B5 was probably an idea here. It's common planning like Sicilian and hedgehog type positions where you try and smash these pawns even at sacrificing one of them, Benko style. And then you'll try and get pressure on these remaining pawns and then clamp down with B4. Or maybe if you just give white a move, you can also try and take advantage of this weak pawn here. And you don't want to play b4 in these positions because it just doesn't look good for white, does it? Because you can easily make a mistake. So b5, technically a pawn sacrifice, but quite a sound one, and it has a good positional idea behind it. So let's go back to the move in the game. Bishop c6. They're preparing the minority attack, I think. Queen f4. We're now going for the bishop swap, playing knight e5. Rook a7. You do a lot of shuffling in the hedgehog positions, but it's mainly aiming to try and take control of the C or D files. Ooh. Knight e5, going to swap the bishop, and also the rook is now out of the way, so maybe if we don't want to swap the bishop, we can move it out of the way, maybe drop it back, and the rook is not in trouble. Bishop takes, king takes, so we've got the trade we want. And knight cd7. We have the option now to go for this trade, but white does not trade it off. Plays knight f3. So we've lost our advantage here, believe it or not, because we've avoided trading off the knights. Potentially e5 is now quite a significant threat if they play rook here and bishop back, and the pawns are already here, so the minority attack is almost raring to go. So white did make, it's not a total blunder, right? Because these positions are quite rich, because there's still quite a lot of pieces left on the board. You've got more space, so generally you do want to keep pieces on. But here, looking at the past two games, we do want to swap off a pair of knights and continue with the basic plans of just trying to take control of key squares and then threaten to push and create a pass pawn. So rook e8. Protecting the bishop. Engines say this is dead drawn, 0-0, but obviously this is not a draw. If you're a human being, both sides have a lot of play. Black's play will mainly revolve around this b5 push. Okay. So we're protecting the bishop, threatening to go back and play e5. And like in the last game, Black's not messing around now. King g1. We're running away from the diagonal. I know Kasparov did this, but there's currently nothing pinning that knight. It's not a problem. So king here was a bit of a slow move. So what's recommended here instead is playing g4. Trying to go for some activity here. Maybe you want to ram up your h and g pawns, try and shift your knight to e4, use our dark square bishop, and start forming an attack. Because it's like white has almost given up on the idea of the minority attack already. The majority attack already. So our bishop's in a good position. We can start moving some pieces around, and maybe we start attacking here. So knight f8, defending against a future attack. Knight e5, knight d6, captures, and knight e4. So we're not worse here. Our advantage might have dipped a bit, but we still got a nice bishop. We still got a lot of play, and not a nice knight here. Slightly messed up Black's majority, so we can at least claim an ending that we're probably equal here. However, this is not what was played. King g1. Because it's too slow, b5. Here it is. The minority attack has reared its head, finally. Technically a pawn sacrifice. You can see here we can take all these pawns off. However, it does allow black to start absolutely throwing mad pressure on the remaining 2 pawns. Basically, whatever happens, white will be left with a weak pawn here, and our majority attack is dead. So c takes, a takes, and b4. So we don't really want to play knight takes, and then here, this doesn't look good for us. We'll probably end up trading here or moving the bishop to here, and then as soon as you threaten the knight, then this pawn is just dropping. So that doesn't look good for us. So we've played b4, stopping this pawn kicking away on knight and losing the a pawn, but we solidified the position, right? But they're going nowhere now. So even if we do try and trade these off, they're just not going anywhere. And this pawn can't be captured, by the way, because the queen's protecting it. So queen a6, doubling down, continuing to put pressure on here. If we move on knight, then this pawn's looking weak. So a3, and you can see like what I said before about this position being like a coiled spring. Suddenly black's pieces are just they're finding good squares. Now white is committed to this structure. Black's plan is, right, dismantle it. They've got a very clear plan here. White, however, is now just defending weak pawns. Knight b6, moving the knight to a better square. So yeah, now it's time for black to start using their majority. Knight e5, once again getting our knight to a good square. Rook c8, and now using this b pawn, the rook can infiltrate on the c file. I know I said it was all about the d file before, but since it's been left open and cracked open by the minority attack, use it. Rook d3, trying to support this knight here, so if they do double up, it won't be a problem. Bishop f8, given an exclam. Why is that? Because white is actually still thinking about this move, believe it or not, going for this mate threat. It also allows a bit more space and stops any ideas of trying to trade this bishop off. It could become very, very useful in these positions against these 2 pawns, which are now fixed on dark squares. So this bishop, it might look like the bishop in the last game, where it's a bit rubbish. This bishop is actually very strong now, because these pawns are a weakness. And also, I forgot to read my notes here. So the knight on f6 can now shift to d5, because say we could go here, you could probably do some sacks here, and this bishop could be left hanging. And now, oh, did I mention f4? I did not. Oh, that might be the next game. Spoilers. So our kingside ideas are not really that great either, because the bishop does a good job of defending here, and the knight does a good job of defending there. So g4, this is a bit too little too late. Oh, sorry. Knight jumps in, attacking our queen. Knight takes, and then knight comes in. So, the bishop moving to f7 also allowed the rook to defend this square, which our queen and knight are attacking. So, queen d4, this is the decisive blunder of the match, so we will look at that in a second. But queen e4, this is apparently the only way to survive according to an engine, but you'd need an engine to survive. So you've got plenty of ideas here. Just solidify your position a bit, keep pressure on this pawn, and white's struggling here because they've made a weakness here as well with their pawn moves, and yeah, it's all black. It's all black here. So queen d4, why is this a blunder? Can anyone spot it? Oh, sorry, someone's rumbling there. Can anyone spot why this is a blunder? Because of f6. Boom. This knight is in dead water. Gone. So we can't move to any of these squares here. The knight is stuck. And we actually cannot move to f3. So, so let's see if we played knight f3, rook c4, and our queen is trapped. And we lose the queen. So you cannot save the knight. So, rook h3. I don't know if white was going for this, or if they missed something, but yeah. So, rook h3, pawn takes, queen takes, rook f7. We're just down a piece here. The piece for a pawn, but it's still not enough. We can't even try and grab this because this is a GM game. They're not gonna lose in a game where they're a piece up for 2 pawns, and these pawns still cannot be pushed. So you're not really up 2 pawns because these are just going to be a weakness all game. So queen h5, going for a mate. We're playing for tricks here. h6, rook g3. I can't really suggest any other moves. Rook c2, putting pressure on f7 and f2 and the bishop. On the way to defend both. Bishop d4. Knight f4, hitting our queen, continuing to add more attackers into the position. Queen e5. Still, this bishop doing an excellent job of defending this. Queen d6, threatening to trade off queens. Queen e4, and now we move our rook back, pin the bishop. e5 is coming, and our queen cannot do anything about this. So yeah, white resigned there. Basically because they just chose the wrong plan. They didn't continue with our plan, and the minority attack stopped our pawns dead, along with a good dark square bishop. Okay, so we've been going for 45 minutes now. I'll just have a quick breathe. I'll put a light on actually. I've been recording for so long that it's gone dark. So, excuse me, I'll put on the light. Right, okay. Ready for this? Last game. I know you've done well to make it this far. So now we'll have a look at a proper minority attack. Where I know this game, it sort of got going because white made a mistake. This next one, black was like, I'm just going to go for it straight away. Let's go. Okay, so we end up having a sort of Catalan here, but so white's aiming to play c4, and this is pretty much the key move of the whole game already, right? So black's like, okay, right, I'm going to stop the c4 break with b5, and already you might be able to spot that if, say, we hit a position where they played c5 and swapped off these pawns here, we'd end up having, oh, I've done it again, we'd end up having a majority versus a minority on the queen side. However, unlike previous games, black has already got their pawn to b5, so the minority attack is ahead. So we castle, knight bd7, bishop g5, bit of an unambitious choice. Bishop e7, knight bd2, c5. So there you go. Pawn takes. And we've got our pawn structure. So white here has played quite unambitiously, and we've got like a Slav with reverse colours. In terms of the pawn structure, anyway. I mean, it'll look more like one when we have c3 played on the board. But black has more space, and b5 is already on the board. So you might be having alarm bells here for your majority versus minority here as white. Anyway, black's chosen pretty much the perfect response to this type of attack. So knight takes, knight d4, bishop d7, c3. There we go. It's looked more like a Slav now, doesn't it? Black castles, just finishing development. Bishop takes, and e4. So this is a necessary move, which is quite bad for white if you're having to play necessary moves on move 12. But white needs to claim some of the centre to just not be worse. It's just pretty standard. Knight takes, bishop takes, and okay. So here's where I want you to stop just for a second. So why is black better here? I mean, white has their majority on the board. We still have a chance to trade off pair of bishops maybe. We've got our knight on the board. Why worse? Well, black has the pair of bishops in quite an open position. You can see we're missing loads of pawns here. Well, two. And this one here, I guess. Missing quite a few pawns. They've got the pair of bishops. And the majority attack, which is white's main goal here, is already under threat from being stopped by this very early b5. So with a5 coming in, this is going to be dead in the water before it's even got going. So that's why black is better here. Just, I mean, it might not be according to an engine. I mean, I can check right now. It's not according to an engine. It's about equal. But strategically, black is smashing white. Especially in over-the-board play. This is very good. Queen d3, going for a cheapo on h7. h6 just stops that. Rook a d1. What happens if we try and advance our majority already? They've brought their pawns forward. What about if we try and do that instead of rook a d1? So if we play b3, it is a mistake. I mean, we'll be going for the c4 break, but it gets immediately stopped by queen c7, putting pressure on here. So you continue doing it. Pawn takes, and then doubling up on the c file, and this pawn's gone. Okay, this pawn's gone. And black's just better here. So we don't try and force it. We'll play rook a d1, queen c7 anyway, and these pieces are looking quite powerful on the semi-open c file and the b file. Once these pawns are traded off, black will probably win the remaining weak pawn, and then they'll just be better. And white will need to fight for a draw in an endgame anyway. We've got a3. They're just trying to stop b4 having as much of an impact immediately, but it does leave some light square weaknesses. Rook fc8. We're doubling down, adding more pressure, asking white what they do. So we've got f3, queen f3. So white's sort of reduced to shuffling now, shuffling their pieces around, but they haven't got a clear plan. So yeah, I said here, if I had the restraint, I'd try and build up more and more pressure as white as black until white finally makes a mistake and just crumbles. However, if I was white here, I'd very much struggle to avoid playing f4. So let's see what happens if we play f4. Well, our queenside attack's dead, so why not try and pounce on the king side, right? It seems pretty logical. We've got a5, black continues with their plan, and we have f5. e5, we don't want to trade off this. This gives white too much. We'll play e5, try and block it up a little bit. Knight c2 is apparently the best move. Bishop c6, trade off the attackers if you can. Knight e3. b4, smashing that position open anyway. Forget this attack. This attack's going nowhere. Look, it's blockaded by this bishop and this pawn. Bishop takes, queen takes, a takes, and c4. And our position is, these pawns are quite vulnerable now. Even more so when you play bishop d8. It's probably the move you had to spot if you really wanted to go for this. Or probably hope that you didn't miss it if you were white. Because once the bishop gets to b6, our knight is looking very sorry for itself, being pinned to the king. This pawn's very weak, and it's actually white who's in trouble of getting attacked. So yeah, queen f3, probably a safer choice, but I would have gone for the f4 pawn push. Try and be active rather than just shuffling, but this is what you're reduced to sometimes. a5, Ari comes in, the minority attack gets rolling. Rook d3, so we really need to stop b4. How would we do that? Well, maybe we could try a pawn break somewhere, or maybe we can play rook here, or something. I don't know, literally anything. Just try something. But rook d3 is given him as a mistake in the book that I got it from. Bishop e8. Maybe we're trying to just look here or trying to protect pieces, but we're just getting the bishop out of the way here. It could become a bit loose because this is only protected by the queen, and the queen wants to pounce down here or move somewhere else. Rook fd1, we're doubling up, trying to take control of the d file, but it doesn't work in this game. And the minority attack, completed, mate. Right, so with this move, our queenside pawns as white are traded off. It might look like we're winning a pawn, but we're not, because the amount of pressure that these three pieces provide, and this bishop, will win the pawn back, maybe even win an extra pawn. So white's passive opening play has resulted from black playing strategically perfect chess for move 4 because of that b5 move, and now it's resulted in this execution here. A takes b, a takes b. A takes b, you couldn't really save it with c4 here, could you? So you've got no option really. Rook c3, so this could get taken very, very soon, but we're attacking the queen first. Queen takes, and now how are we defending this pawn? You can't really play here, right? You'll just take it. I mean, this rook drops. Well, actually, no. Just take the knight, and then this pawn drops. But yeah, you can't really defend this pawn anymore. So it's left a horrifically weak pawn, right? Which you can just pounce on. It's very sort of Benko style. You open up lines and then you use them. Knight c6, a flashy way to try and trade off some pieces. Bishop takes, rook takes, bishop takes, and then rook takes. So black's plan, the minority attack is now complete. They're up a pawn, and they've got a better position. It's not easy to convert this because it's still 4v3, still a few pieces left on the board, but white now makes it much, much harder for themselves. They play rook a1 with the idea of trying to trade off queens here, but at the cost of another pawn. Trying to go for an opposite coloured bishop's ending. However, a more active way to defend would have been rook d7. So we're infiltrating with a bit more active play. So I'll just play a few moves. Queen e5, getting a better square for your queen. King g2 and g6. Black's still better, but it's much more difficult here to try and progress. The opposite coloured bishops are in white's favour here. But yeah, trading all the way down here loses tactically. I don't know if you can spot it. Loses tactically to rook takes f2. We'll still go for this because it's the best move. Queen takes, bishop takes, rook takes, bishop takes. And now, believe it or not, I mean, I'm not going to go through the full ending here, but even though it's opposite coloured bishops, the two extra connected pass pawns are winning, and the fact that there are extra pawns in this on both sides make it winning for black. And even the engine says it's -2 for white. So I'll just play through the rest of the game for completeness. But yeah, this is a one game. f5, we're pushing our pawns. h4, Harry is unfortunately not enough to save white. Very sad. Bishop a4, we've got a lot of bishop manoeuvring here. Just trying to get the right area. This bishop wants to land on e1 to attack both of these pawns now that they're fixed on dark squares. Bishop c6, there we go, e1. King f4, and now a very cheeky way to try and finish the game. e5 with check. If the king moves, then we just gobble up these pawns here. Nom nom. So the king moves back to f3, defending the pawn. g5, and then the king comes running in. And then h4, another very nice way to finish the game. And we have our two pawns versus nothing. And one of them is definitely landing on a dark square, which makes it very difficult for white to stop. King g2, and the bishop is just too misplaced as well. And now our king is going to come in and believe it or not, I think with king f5, white is in Zugzwang, and white resigned here. So yeah, they're all the games that I've got for you on majority versus minority. Just hit an hour, bloody hell. Okay, so let's have a quick. We've already gone on this long. I may as well do a quick run through of what we've covered, in case you've come back in a couple of installments. So, what have we done? Well, we've said that we need to try and push our pawns for a victory, but a lot of it is sort of involving piece play. Minor pieces, very important. Want to swap off our light square bishops, generally, and a pair of knights, and try and just shift our pieces over to the queen side. Yeah, play there. Both sides want to play on the queen side. There's a lot of rook play involving the d file and trying to infiltrate on the 7th. In this game here, we used our potential threats of sort of queenside expansion to distract black's queen over here, and then we got a position where the queen was too far away, and eventually we'd go after these pawns here. And then for this one, we managed to swap the correct piece to stop black's counterplay. If I can find that cheeky little bishop takes e5, getting rid of the most active piece, and then we use our knights, get into better squares, and eventually infiltrate over here, eventually leading to just a painful loss. And then resignation here. However, if we don't play too well, if we don't focus on what we need to do, the minority attack can rear its ugly head, and white gets stuck here. So you need to focus on black. If you see this pawn structure, try and get your pawns up there, try and smash it out of the way, and then it eventually under pressure just crumbled with queen d4. Losing to a very neat little f6, and winning either the knight or the queen. And then the last one, we showed if you're strategical from move 1, well 4 in this case, if you know what you're doing, and your opponent is quite unambitious in their opening, you can punish them for it immediately, and yeah, you'll get a position like this, and eventually sack a pawn for insane pressure. And white is just having a horrible game here. And you have things like the final mistake where you're down 2 pawns in a losing ending. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed that. I have been talking for a while now, so if you don't want to hear my voice again, that's great. But please do let me know if that lesson was good for you. If it was too long, I feel it probably was too long. If that was right for you, tell me. I'll keep the lessons this length. If you understood it, that would be great. Any feedback would be fantastic. But yeah, I do hope you've enjoyed it. I'll be back next time with another trial run of this series, probably focusing on either Carlsbad or isolated queen pawn structure. But yeah, I mean, with COVID times, it's probably a self-isolating queen's pawn, isn't it? But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. I will leave a link to this in the description below. If you don't want to watch all the video, that's fine. Just go read through the study. And I'll try and put some timestamps in so you can skip through to different games as well. But yeah, thank you very much. I hope you have a nice week. See you in the next one. Cheers.